Thank you, Guy. Okay, I'm new to this. Okay, actually, to be honest with you. Okay, I've been using a different meeting tool called GoToMeeting, and I just switched to Zoom. And then so, Jim, okay, you're there.
I
Jim,
am.
are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, you can start now.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to this presentation about the developer perspective on Report Desk. It's greetings from Northern Michigan today, where it's partly cloudy, 52 degrees, and breezy, not like LA. I apologize that I was not able to be there and meet with you face to face. It's something I look forward to well, in this case, it's been almost 3 years, I think. But today we're going to talk about the developer perspective of Report Desk. So why would you want to do Report Desk? So we want to compare Report Desk versus, for example, Crystal Reports or Excel Query. The big difference really is that in Report Desk, we do the join and in general, we're preparing the SQL select statement for you. Whereas Crystal and Excel Query, they do that. I'm sorry, you do that when you do a report from them. So on the surface, it would seem that Report Desk is less powerful than Crystal Reports or Excel Query. But we're going to talk about how that might not be the case. So the architecture, Carol probably covered a bit of this morning. The architecture of Report Desk is in two pieces. There's the SQL template piece, and that's where we develop the basic SQL information that you need for the report. And then you can use that, you or we can use that for multiple reports and or multiple versions of reports. And then there's the second half, which is the report design part, where we will do the initial report, and then we will share that or release it, and you will be able to then use that or create custom versions of that. We're going to go over this versioning just a little bit again. So the program ID here, or the topic you might say, is ARSLMUDR, and the last 5 lines on the screen are user-defined reports for salesmen. The .b part means it's the base from Netzlint. It could also be a .e for an enhancement, like the gun enhancement. The template is defined by ARSLMUDR.b.1. And you'll notice that all 5 of these user-defined reports are using the same template. B.1.1.0 is the first report that we created, and then there's the B.1.2.0, which is the second one. And if you look at the first 3, these are, because they end in something other than 0, they end in .1, .2, and .3. It means that these are user modified reports, and they're all based off the UDR salesman list, which is B.1.1, and of course, therefore, also based off the template B1. So creating a new report, how do we do that? What's involved? If the category or the report ID does not exist, like ARSLMUDR, we have to first modify the COBOL program that has the list option on it or print option on it to allow Report Desk to be called as an option. And then we go in and modify the system configuration file, add a couple entries there, so that it associates ARSLMUDR with the program that's normally called to produce a legacy report. Now, when we first do this, there will not be a template, a SQL template already. So the very first thing that we'll do is put us in the SQL template maintenance screen where we'll create the template. And then once that is done, we'll create the initial report, and we'll go back and forth and fine tune it until we have something that we're ready to deliver. So on the SQL template, which only NetSolent developers are doing, the performance of the report is primarily determined by the way the select statement is constructed. And by that, I mean the order of the joins, the kind of joins, where there are group bys and order bys, and also there are certain where statements that will be critical in the performance. And so we want to control that part of the process to ensure that when you're running a report from one of our templates, that you'll get the best performance. The select statement can be complicated, so we provide that. And we also provide useful formulas, and sometimes they're complex. And so we provide them in the SQL template. And then you all can view but not modify the template. So you can see how it's constructed, but you can't change that part. You can only customize the report output. So how long does it take? It really depends. It depends on the complexity of the table joins that need to be done, the complexity of the formulas that need to be done, and we may spend a bit of time on getting the best performance. Okay, so this is a little quiz part, Edward. We're doing that, right? The quiz?
Right.
Okay.
I'm right here.
All right. This is an example of a SQL statement that finds and orders shipping status. There are two of them, two select statements here. The first one, essentially, we don't know how long that will run because we ran it when we first, this was our first attempt at this, and when we ran it, after an hour, we just gave up and said, well, we got to do something different. So then we redesigned the select statement just a little bit on the 1, 2, 3rd line. And then that returns a result very quickly, a matter of seconds. And so, and one of the reasons that there was such a dramatic difference here is that we were doing this with a customer's note file, which, you know, was very, very large. So it had to go through lots of notes. So the quiz question is, who can tell me why the second select statement was so much faster than the first one?
So anyone know the answer? Raise your hand. Okay, I see. Okay, now we're giving a further chance. Okay, hold your mind. Yes, go ahead.
Or that note file and they do another calculation for this person and do other result, then so it has another part to deal with.
I think, generally speaking, you are on the right direction. Okay, and then so I consider that's the right answer. But okay, Aaron, your chance. Right, exactly. So, so both of you are correct. Okay, but let me summarize it. Okay, is the first SQL statement, because it has to use a left, right? So essentially, the P-SQL engine cannot use the index directly because the first SQL statement, SQL cannot use the index directly. And guess what is the node database? Is 9 gig. Actually, Cheryl, I was using your example. So it's 9 gig database, and then so and then so they're basically taking forever for the first SQL statement. But once we take out that left, right, and then we join directly, and it's able to use the index, and then it go quickly. So, you know, I'm going to give out 2 magic coin. Okay, and so the magic coin, you know, you can spend it, or you can go to landing.
I think I detected there's a ringer in the audience.
Okay, so Jim, you can go ahead.
Okay. All right. So basically we're running through our own SQL. We're testing it and making sure that we're giving you the best performance that we can. So this is an example of the template. And can you all see my cursor?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically what you do, of course, is you describe the template, you give it a name, and you tell it from this drop-down list what table is the primary table. And then it actually does the select star from AR salesman file here. And this bracket user where, that means that's where we're going to put the SQL stuff that relates to the input parameters that you specify when you run the report, and then we're just going to order it by salesman number. So this is a very simple select statement. We've provided a couple of three very simple formulas that you can use just by when you're designing. You can drag the profit PTD, you can drag that column into the report, and it will generate this formula for you. Okay. This is an example of a more complex SQL. In this case, we're looking at the AR open order file, and we're doing a left join to the customer file, and we're doing a left join to the terms file with a couple of conditions. The type is T, and the terms code matches the AR terms code, and then we will put in the code for the user where. Based on the input parameters that you specify. So it turns out that this left join can be done in different ways. And we found that, and we did it with the first time we tried it, we found that we needed a left join, not a select star from AR open file, comma, AR cus file, comma, AR codes terms. So this is the select that we end up with, and then there are several from trivial to a little more complicated formulas in here. So the last one, for example, document type, we're providing a literal based on what we find in the record for document type and payment type. Okay, so now we're going to go just through the report example of running it. So this is the AR open item edit list by apply to. The defaults are already set. That's something that you have control over. And you can optionally change the input parameters to set the scope of the report and to determine how many records you'll be getting back and which ones. And I want you to note the calendar button, the check boxes, and the drop-down lists here. So for example, on the cutoff date, you can click on the calendar or you can enter the cutoff date yourself. So the calendar is just helping you complete the screen. There's a checkbox here for print. If you want to print a debit balance customers, then you can select this checkbox and that generates some SQL so that you only get those records. The same with the next two checkboxes. And you also have this drop-down list of what kind of documents you're interested in. Okay. Now, in the lower right, the SQL button is highlighted in red. So if you want to see the SQL that this will generate, you can click on this SQL button, and it will show you the SQL that was generated. So you can see that if you had to develop this yourself, it would not be a lot of fun. Okay, and you can also, this test SQL button, if you press this button, it will tell you how many records it finds. So if you want to, you can do this before you produce a report, but you generally probably wouldn't do that. And now we're into the second half of the report desk architecture, is the designer part. And this is, we provide, this is an example of what we provide initially. And then you have the ability to go in here and add input parameters by dragging something from the body area up into here and then clicking on the information button. So, and that's where you can set a default or a range or some SQL lookup or whatever. The second area is how you order and group the report. In this case, there's a report group, not a group by in the SQL sense, but there's a report group based on the customer number. And we're using, in this case, the alternate customer number because it provides better performance. And you don't need to worry about that as well. And then you can see there's a body tab. This doesn't have a sub-report, so there wouldn't be any information in that tab. But because we've said that there's a group here, it will ask you, it will allow you to enter a group header and a group footer, and then finally a footer if you want for totals. Okay. You'll also notice that if you change something in here, you will not be able down here on the left to press the save button. It's been disabled. What you can do is save a new one, and it will look for the next open number after B.1.2.0. So maybe it'll be a .1 or a .2 or something. And so that's how you know that this is your custom one when you see it in the list. But you can't save the original. We provide that, but you can save a new customized version of it. So the features really, you may have already heard this morning, is that you're basically doing drag and drop for the report column layout. So you can drag something over there to create a new column. You can rearrange, you can drag up and down to rearrange the column order. So you have that, and then you have the ability to specify input parameters that will determine the where clause of the select statement. So you can modify those from what we give you. And then you can also create groups and or change the sort order in most cases. There are a few cases where we don't allow that. If you want to go from a single line to multiple lines in the detail area of the report, you can add lines. You can decide or change what's in a group header or group footer or report total lines. And the thing that's that we're pretty happy with is that the first time you drag a column from a table and put it in the columns for the reports, it will default, the header will default to the name of the column. And it will try to figure out what type it is, but it's just doing that based on, some conventions. So you can change, for example, the column type. I'm sorry, the column header, the title information for that column. You can change the type of data it is, whether it's right or left aligned, and so forth. And you can change the size, and it will learn that. It will learn that this column should have that as the defaults when someone next uses it to drag onto another report. And we provide many formatting and processing options. Okay, so it's a superior platform compared to the legacy reports in several ways. We can develop them much faster. The performance is much better because of the SQL engine that we're using instead of the transaction engine. The reports are better looking. You have a choice of format. We can give you industry standard PDF, CSV, or Excel. It's customizable by you, and you can save and reuse common sets of input parameters, and you can restrict reports to specific users if you need it. And I'm going to go through these individually here. So in terms of faster development, we don't have to do the tedious, time-consuming report layout. You just drag and drop things into the report. The SQL template can be reused to develop multiple different reports real quickly. Where we could select different columns for a different report or use different where conditions add sorting and subtotaling and that sort of thing. And because it's automatically supports multiple output formats, the CSV, Excel, and PDF, we don't have to do any additional work to get all three formats. On the performance side, you've no doubt noticed that if you run an Elliott report on the SQL Server, it's much faster than when you want to run it on the workstation. And that's because the btrieve operations are all happening on the database server and not going back and forth to the workstation to combine related records. So basically, when you're filtering records, you do a read on the server, it goes over the network, it gets back to the workstation, it decides if it is interested in that record or not, or what other records it might need, and it just goes back and forth and back and forth. And so when it's done when you're running it just on the server, there's a hugely less amount of network traffic going on, and that's why it's much faster. Report Desk uses the SQL engine on the server to do the same thing. So even if you're running Report Desk on a workstation, it generally will perform as well as a legacy report running on the server, and way faster, typically, than running a legacy report on the workstation. And okay, yeah, that's basically what I want to say about that. Well, we think they're better looking. We're using proportional fonts, which are easier to read. The heading area is, visibly different from the details. We're providing shading and bold fonts, larger fonts available for grouping and subtotaling and totaling. And when we output to Excel, we freeze the title line on there, and we add some shading and do some other things to make it easy to get a pretty good looking Excel spreadsheet. So the sample PDF here, up on top you see the heading area. The column heading area is in shaded in that boxed area, and then in the detail area we have a group header. You'll see customer number 300. It's only repeated on that. It's not repeated. It's only on that line with the name of the customer and the customer's credit limit. And then we have the detail lines that are on the report, and then we count and sum the details for that group. So that's a group footer. And then the Beverly Supply Company is a group header, and then the two documents with their totals is another group footer. And then at the bottom of the report, there can be grand totals if you want to do that. On the choice of output, we are giving you PDF by default. We design basically for PDF, and that's good for printing, emailing documents, and so forth. And you can instead select comma separated values where the file extension is .csv, and that's typically used for importing to other applications. And one of which could be Excel. You can take the CSV output and import it into Excel, for example. The Excel output, which has the extension of .xlsx, is typically used to provide output for further analysis. And so we provide a nice looking simplified spreadsheet for that. And then also we are integrating some of our reports with Post Office. So at this time, we've only done AR statements, but I think we have customers already using that. Okay, so this is the sample Excel spreadsheet. What you should notice here is that the heading line is got a little shading and a bold typeface. And then the detail lines, what you'll notice there is that the columns are automatically sized to fit the data that it finds, and including the title. And if you scroll down past the bottom of this screen, the first line will stay frozen on the screen. All right, so what modification abilities will you have? Basically, these items on this list, you can add, change, or delete report columns. You can add additional parameters. If you don't like the defaults that we've set, you can go in and change the defaults. You can, for the input parameters, I mean, you can change the sort order unless you're restricted by the template. We do that occasionally. There are appearance options like shading and font changes, and things like use green bar in the output, and just lots of different things that you can do. You can also create for example, create your own formula. If we don't provide a formula that you want to see the value of that formula as a column in the report, you can do that as well. Another important thing we think is that you can save and reuse input parameters. So let's say a user produces a specific reports that are subsets of the data on a repeating basis. So the person can fill out the first set of parameters, run the report, and then save them to reuse later. And then he can repeat the process for another subset and save that, the parameter screens values, to reuse that later. So here's an example where the user is running AR statements, and they want to break it into chunks, into 4 chunks, so that it's not all one process that runs for a while, because it's doing lots of emailing and that sort of thing. And so they have run this 4 times in the past, setting the parameter values the way they want them, and then saving them. And so now if they the next month, when they come in, they can click on the use button, pick the first group here and run that, and then come back and click the use button again, select the second group and run that. This also has the ability to save the output format if you want that. Is the pace okay here? I'm talking a lot. Are we good?
Yeah, good.
Yeah,
Okay.
people say, yeah, they're fine.
All right, thank you. I should have asked earlier, sorry. Now, restricting access. First, you should know that the default security follows the Elliott menu permissions to access the reports. So for example, if you give a user the ability to maintain the salesman, then there will be a menu item on the salesman screen that you can click on to produce a report or a list of the salespeople. If a user has that access to that, he will also have access to the report desk reports for that have been developed for the salesman. Okay, so that's the basic security that you get. But you also can, a user with the authority to modify a report, special users inside the company, they'll have the ability to specify a specific list of users that are the only users who can run the report. So in this example, the person pressed the security button on the lower right, and up pops this dialog, and they can either select all users can run the report or only these users. And in this case, you just put in a comma separated list of users, Elliott user IDs, to run the report and press save. And so those are the only people who would be able to run this report. Now, what if you need a new report, something that we have not provided? What we'd like you to do is post a new idea for a report on support.elliott.com, and then vote for that and any other new report ideas that are important to you. And we'll just say that because it's easier to develop these new reports, the commonly requested reports are likely to be free of charge. Okay, if lots of people want this report, lots of customers of our customers want this report, we'll likely develop them at our expense. And so posting a new idea, and I hope most of you are familiar with this, but you log in, you go to elliottsupport.com, and you need to log in with your support ID, and then you will have an option on, you can see the ideas that have been posted here. There are 13 people that have some input on version 9 changes, and 4 for this second one, and 3 people have voted for this one. And then here's the area where you can click on this and post a new idea. So when you're posting a new report idea, please be as clear as possible and provide as much detail as you can. Maybe you can have a sample screen of the fields that you want to input, or a list of them, like what things you want to be able to specify to restrict the range of the report. If you can attach a sample of the report output, if it's not, you know, if it's not obvious. And then what we're saying is that the more detailed the idea, the more likely it will be voted for and developed. So here's an example of, you know, one that is pretty detailed. So there's text to describe, you know, what happens now and what is desired. And then there were 3 screenshots that are attached. And so there's, you know, plenty of detail on this to for us to know what you're talking about, for others to know how to vote, whether or not they want to vote for it.
Okay, Jim, I'd like to stop here, okay, a little bit. So who posted this idea? Anybody? Okay. Well, okay. It's possible I posted. But I think this is you know, the things I like to see, because what's happening is you have a multiple screenshot, right? As well as with a detail, and then so we know exactly what the proposed idea is. So this is the things we like to do. And with this, then if there's enough people support it, then we can, you know, have an easier action, okay, as far as what to do next. Yes. Huh? Danny, that's you guys. Who's Danny? But where is a screenshot coming from? Design WordPress. Okay, Design WordPress, he's not here. Okay, too bad, because I was going to give away a coin. Okay, Jim, okay, go ahead.
Moving on to the next slide. Okay, but what if nobody votes for your idea? It may be that your requirements are just unique to you. So in that case, ask us, because we can develop these reports much faster than in the past, and we can provide them less expensively than before. And if you sponsor the development of a new report or feature, it might benefit others. And if they will sponsor things that are important to them, that could benefit you. So this could be a mutually beneficial sort of symbiotic relationship here. And then collectively, we will all have a richer collection of useful reports and features. All right, let's talk about some planned enhancements. We're going to, I think the next item up actually is we're going to handle sensitive data automatically, like cost information. So we will identify individual columns in individual tables that need to be hidden from most users, all except the users with that have the current menu ability to see that information. So once we've identified them and, you know, specified what menu approval they need to see them, we will, when we're developing the report or the other output, we will on the fly go find out if they have menu access, the correct menu access to see that column. And if not, we'll just eliminate it from the report. It won't say cost, you can't see it, it'll just not be there. Another one that's pretty high on our list is we want to provide more control over the SQL timeouts. We want to reduce the chance of runaway queries like the one we talked about before that ran an hour and then we just stopped it. So one of the things we do typically is there's a SQL statement executed just to count the number of records. So, you know, it doesn't do all of the, you know, it just counts the number of records. So it's much faster, but we're going to provide a separate default timeout value for that from when we're actually processing the records. And so, for example, we might say there's a timeout of, I don't know, 30 seconds or something on counting. And if we time out on counting, then, you know, that's something that we have to decide what we're going to do. But at least we won't, if it can't count them quickly, then maybe at least we'll tell you that, you know, you're at risk of something running a long time. And the thought right now is that we will have an overall timeout time for the counting phase and a timeout for the processing records for, you know, for your company, for your configuration. But then on users who can override default timeouts, users who are designated users can override these defaults for specific reports. If you know something is going to take longer and you know it's okay, you can make the timeout faster. I'm sorry, make it timeout longer. Also, we're going to throttle concurrent usage by user. So it is possible that a single user could attempt to run a report, many reports at the same time. And if that were to happen, especially if they tended to be runaway reports, then it could affect server performance. So for other users. So we'll make sure that an individual cannot run more than a specified number, maybe 2 or, you know, might be 3, we're not sure, of concurrent reports. So that's another enhancement that we've planned. So we are planning also to do more reports like the AR statements, because they have additional features. That one in particular includes database updating. So for example, calculating the new balance, we go ahead and do that. And before we decide who actually needs to get a statement. And in that example, we also are using multiple fonts and, you know, graphics, line drawing, links, images, that kind of thing. So you can create, you know, we can create for you something, you know, more, you know, better looking and more comprehensive. And then that one also integrates with PDF Post Office. So that's important as well. So we're going to do more of those. Okay, so it's easier, right? It's faster, it's prettier, it's more flexible. You can change it and it's free. So that's the conclusion of this, my part, and now it's open for questions.
Okay, any question? Right, Avi.
They are open items, like this, available to open item only.
Right.
This will do it now.
So Jim, the question is, we know in Crystal it's extremely complicated to do the AR open item. Will this one do it? And you want me to answer that question for you?
Yes, because I don't know the details very well.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the answer to that is yes or no. Okay. And
that's what I would say.
What?
That's what I would have said. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so it's because it's more complicated. The devil is always in the detail, and then so we can do some level of the AR open item, okay, record joining, and then make the SQL statement very complicated, okay, etc. It's possible to do that, and then but there will probably some kind of limitation where we are reaching to, etc. So this is in traditional speaking, we use the COBOL program, and then it doesn't need to worry about the database relational, etc. We can do whatever we want, right? But when we come to using the SQL engine, everything data has to be relational, and then so this become a big challenging to do things like the AR agent report. Okay, it's very challenging to do that with a SQL. So the answer to your question is yes or no. Okay, it's possible to do, but it's complicated to do. Okay, that's the first answer. The second answer is it's probably more likely we can do it than you do it yourself because it's complicated. So it's more likely we can make something complicated work than you try to do it yourself. So in this sense, the answer is yes or no. But I think the ultimate issue is if we want to resolve this issue, ultimately it's probably need to resolve from a database point of view. Okay, so that means version 9, we need to take a look at this issue and then how to design the database in a way that we can use a SQL statement to do this easier than the current situation. So I know this is a complicated answer to your question. Okay, yes. So Jim, the question is how deep are you of the report writer into the COP and the bill material? I think now, Carol should answer this question, okay?
I agree.
So, so I believe that we have quite some significant COP report right now, as of now, okay? And we need to add some more for, well, PO is missing, okay? Bill material, I think, generally speaking, is missing as well. Say that again? There's some in the bill material, but I think there's two areas that we need to add more. One is the PO module, one is the BOMP module, and then so I have a discussion with Carol, so we need to add more to that area. So just so you know, okay? But yes, so that's a good question. And then any other question? Yeah, Cheryl. Right. Yes, that's an excellent question. Okay, and then so, Cheryl, for you to raise that question, I need to give you a point. So Jim, the question is this, okay? Since you can have a multiple user and then running against the SQL server with a report desk, and then so there may be a performance impact to the server. So is it possible to run the report desk against the report engine instead of a database engine? So I let you answer the question.
Okay, so I can only answer that on a theoretical basis. It does seem to me that that would be a good plan. I don't know the details. I have not done that myself.
Okay,
I think so you might have more information on that.
Okay, let me take it. Okay, so in the setup screen of the Elia configuration setup utility, in the database page, we have an option to let you specify what is your database engine, what is your report engine. By default, report engine is blank, meaning that you just use a database engine, but you can let the traffic directly against a report engine. So yes, it will basically reduce the burden, okay, by using the report engine. So now, does everybody require me to explain a little bit what is a report engine? Maybe this is a good time, okay? So what is a report engine, right? So PSQL in the past is you have a database engine, right? And all of our earlier data need to be reside on the database engine. Now, as you have traffic against that report engine, database engine, and if there's a lot of heavy traffic, and then the database engine may start to bog down. And starting from PSQL 13, and Acton come out with is what we call the report engine. So report engine is kind of like a clone of the database engine. So what happened is you can also, in addition to the database engine, you can install the report engine. So what will happen is this, okay? You run your report against the report engine instead of a database engine. So it's basically it's kind of like you use your clone, okay, to deal with the traffic. And then so as long as the clone, the report engine, has enough memory power, etc., then what will happen is this is extra CPU, another extra box can deal with the traffic, right? And then that traffic doesn't hit the database engine, so it relieves the database engine of the burden, and then let the report engine to handle it. Now, if you have some very heavy stuff against the report engine, make the report engine slow, but that does not affect your database engine, which is critical works like the things you do in earlier database entry, enter order, etc. It does not affect the database engine. So that is a critical piece, okay, that we can basically expand up. Computer is cheap, okay? And then you can just add very powerful computer with a lot of CPU and memory. So by spreading out the computing power for the database to report engine, it basically greatly scaled the ability of the database. So report engine is a feature after PSQL 13, but I want to caution you, okay? I think there's still room for the report engine to improve. For example, if you shut down your database engine, of course, your report engine go down as well, right? But if you reboot your database engine, what happened to your report engine? Well, if you shut down your database engine, reboot it, maybe service pack update, right? So once you do the service pack update, your database engine is up and running. What happened to your report engine? It is still down, okay? And then you have to basically kind of restart your report engine. So this is some area I think it still requires some improvement. But it is definitely a right way to go by expanding out, okay? Now, of course, the other possibility is if your database server getting too busy, you can always say, let's get more CPU, right? And then, but I think the return of your investment of adding more CPU to the database engine, to some extent, it will level off, okay? And maybe when you get to a CPU, as you get more CPU, it doesn't really give you the equivalent percentage of return with adding more CPU. So at that point, using a report engine is probably a better choice. Okay. So that's a complicated answer. So any other question? All right. So we're gonna break for lunch, but before we break for lunch, I want to mention a couple of things. Okay. Number one is, on the earlier show, right? And we have a lot of extra large size shirt, a lot, okay? And we have significant number of XXL, but for the large, medium, small, we don't have as many. So if you get a coin, right, it will be to your advantage to exchange for publisher as quick as possible. Okay, first come, first.
Oh, it could be a stampede.
Okay, so Jim, thank you very much, okay, for your participation today, and then we wish everything going on with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
we break for lunch and we will start the next presentation at 12:30, okay? Maybe you're not done with your lunch at that time, but that's okay. We're just going to, as long as you can see it, okay, we do the presentation at 12:30. Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.